goes around where we're looking at inclusive learning and we call it inclusive education or inclusive learning. And I really want to break that down a little bit for you today. So wherever you are in the world, whether you are a person with a disability or you have a family member or a friend with a disability, and you're trying to consider, well, what is the best thing for this person, this child, in order for them to live a quality life, we start to look at inclusion in action and what that actually means. So when we look at inclusive learning or inclusive education, it's about providing an education or access to education for all people, all children, adults, with or without a disability. So I suppose what I'm going to break down today is some of the elements of understanding universal design, as well as the aspects of inclusion. So when we look at inclusive learning, or inclusive education, we look at three aspects. We look at the physical inclusion, we look at the social inclusion, and we also look at the instructional inclusion. And, I did want to start by making the point that when we have a child that's gifted or talented, or a young child who's really clever and starting school reading, we don't second guess that. We don't think about, well, what do we need to do to meet this child's needs? We don't look at modification or adapting curriculum for that particular child as a negative, in a negative way. Watch my video on attitudes and inclusion if you want to know a little bit more about what's actually creating that mindset. So with children with disabilities, we tend to view it more negatively. We look at it as extra work we need to do, or it can also be viewed as a burden on teachers or systems. So I want to take you a little bit, I suppose go into a little bit more in depth of understanding why inclusive education or inclusive learning is important for children and adults with disabilities. So and I think I won't be able to do it justice if I don't at least look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so when we look at the development, the psychological development of a human being, we know that it's very important for us to have certain needs put in place in order for us to flourish and live a purposeful, happy life. So Maslow talks about having, our physiological needs met, which is our need for food, water, shelter. So that's right at the bottom of the actual pyramid of his research into our needs. Now, once we have those physiological needs met, then we're able to go to that next level. And the next level after we have, and it's this ability to feel safe. So if we don't have those basic needs met, we can't feel safe. So safety is very important. Once we feel safe in any environment, whether it's in our home, work, or school environment, then we can look at the third part of Maslow's needs, and that is to feel that we're loved and we belong. And that's exactly where inclusive learning or inclusive education fits into that third section of feeling that you belong to a group, you belong in society. And so for a very long time, when we look at people with disabilities, they have felt excluded, congregated and secluded from mainstream settings. And so when we look at the history of disability, which I do have another video on, be sure to check that out. When we look at the history of disability, we know that that's how people have been treated. So when we look at that third area of feeling loved and belonging, it's extremely important. If we don't have those bottom three elements, which is our physiological needs, our ability to feel safe, and our loved and belonging, we can't actually have good self-esteem. So our self-esteem is often reliant on those bottom three things. Now, once we have good self-esteem, which is that fourth tier, it leads us to the very top of the pyramid, which is our ability to self-actualize, to go on and live a purposeful life, to do what we were born to do. And so this is really important. So when we look at inclusive learning, I want you to keep in the back of your mind the understanding of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is more than just about children with disabilities going to mainstream school. It's a human rights concept. It's a human rights issue. everybody, regardless of their ability, regardless of their disability, should have access to all the same opportunities as a person without a disability. So it is a human rights issue, and unfortunately for parents and families with children with disabilities, we're guided by the professionals, and so you really need to look at my video on attitudes and inclusion to understand where some of those attitudes are coming from, and how sometimes we need to really take a person-centered approach when we consider meeting the needs of a child with a disability. So I'm going to just create all these really short videos that will allow you to grab different concepts. So today, obviously, I've looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I'm going to look at the 3 aspects of inclusion: the physical, social, and instructional inclusion. So when we look at physical inclusion is around the human rights. It's the child's right to be part of the enrolment process. Now, currently in Australia, we're guided by the professional teaching standards, which have been governed by NESA in New South Wales, and we know that when we look at the standards, the very first one of know your students is extremely important, and that underpins very much what we're looking at with inclusion. We really need to know that our children, although we have 20 or 30 of them in a classroom, they are individual children. So, when we look at the idea of physical inclusion, it is around the enrolment process, so that child's right to physically be in that environment. It obviously can also look at access, so it can be ramps, wheelchair access, but also can look at other elements of physical access for a child. But currently, as I said, we are guided by the Anti-Discrimination Act, we're guided by the professional teaching standards for teachers and the disability standards for education, which have been put there to protect the enrolment process and the human rights of all children with a disability to be able to attend a mainstream school with children without a disability. We know from all research that delivers the best outcomes for children with disabilities. So that's our physical inclusion, and I will create another little short video just on that if you want to have a little bit more in-depth understanding of it. The other area, as I said, was social inclusion. Social inclusion is really about providing opportunities as a classroom teacher to allow students to collaborate and communicate, and that's usually done through group work. So the idea of collaboration and communication and developing social skills is extremely important to inclusion, because it actually allows children to model social skills, social etiquettes and etiquettes that need to be used, whether it's in the virtual sense or in the in the virtual or the physical sense. And that allows children to develop those skills. So if you have a student who has a disability which affects their social interaction, placing them with other children who are the same doesn't give them the opportunity to learn those skills. So in a mainstream environment, they develop and they learn those skills if we provide opportunities for social inclusion. And that can be on the playground and also in the classroom. So again, if you want to know more about social inclusion and strategies for social inclusion, have a look at my YouTube video, which is titled Social Inclusion. The third aspect is instructional inclusion, and this is where we look at a piece of work and we consider the principles of universal design. Now, universal design says, how can I produce one thing that allows the most access for most people? We see universal design being used in our building industry a lot. If you consider having an entry to a building, a door. Now, if I had a door that was just automatic, then most people would be able to access that doorway. If I consider a door that may need to be opened, then even though you might have easy access into it, you still need someone to open the door. So the more we look at one item and we consider how many people can access this without being inhibited. So if we think about disability as being socially constructed, rather than being in the person. So here is where we're looking at the understanding of disability from a medical model, which says the person's broken and they have a problem within them, to socially constructed. What are we doing within society that creates exclusion of people with disabilities? So when we look at the learning aspect of instructional inclusion, it's really about how do I create a piece of work that allows everybody to access it regardless of where they're at. How can it have multiple entry points? How can there be enough depth in this activity that allows some students to really critically think, really reapply knowledge, be able to show their understanding in lots of different ways? And how can I allow someone who might have a basic understanding to still feel part and be able to access that content? So I will be sharing with you on the instructional inclusion video many strategies which allow for instructional inclusion. Sometimes it's just a shift in thinking, and you will see that I do not tend to go into using textbooks or worksheets, because we know that does not allow for inclusion. I've often said that if a worksheet is difficult for a child, it can't help them. And if it's easy, they don't learn anything. So how can we create learning opportunities that are about engaging children at multiple levels and allowing them to work in a relevant way around something they're motivated in, but be able to access that content easily? So once we consider those three areas of inclusion, the physical, social, and instructional, then we are on the way to creating what is known as an inclusive classroom, not just for children with disabilities, but for every single child in your classroom. So it's about creating having the one environment, but being able to cater for individual needs. It really is about taking a person-centered approach to learning that allows everyone to feel valued and accepted. As have a look through some of my other videos, please subscribe to my channel, and that will allow me to continually get your feedback and be able to provide you with strategies and hopefully some great resources that will help you develop that inclusive classroom. Have a great day.